Good morning. Today is the day for another chapter, chapter 6 of Father Donovan's Tree, written by me in 2000. I think I started in 2003. Anyway, chapter 6, chapter 5, the previous one was it was based in the Victorian time of Lucius Gray, incarcerated in Mortlach, which was then a prison, later to become a beautiful house full of apartments that Jessica lived in. And so, without further ado, as they say, I shall start on chapter 6. Jessica was awoken early by a cool breeze blowing through her bedroom window. There was a beautiful blazing red dawn that cast a deep glow upon the world and into the interior of Jessica's bedroom. Despite this, she felt oddly out of sorts, cold and uncomfortable, but there was consolation in the vibrant dawn chorus, even though there had been a heavy dew in the night. By morning, everything was covered in a light coating of glistening water droplets. The plants and trees were bejewelled, and the world that day was greeted with a singular glittering assurance. The early morning sun was still low in the sky and reflected off the high cirrus. This created a new world of imagery above that was so different from that below. The bewitching deep crimson light that illuminated a wilder phantasm. It was a morning to die for, and yet one that failed to rouse Jessica from an unusual despondency. William, as usual, had elected to share the bed with her, as was his wont, and his right, and in consequence occupied most of her side. Jessica had been forced to shift over progressively during the night as William intruded upon her space while he scratched, washed, and groomed, making all manner of intriguing but frankly slightly irritating noises as he perfected his toilette. His frequent scratching shook the bed annoyingly, and then when finally he sprawled out on his back, he made himself very much at home. Jessica was left quite uncovered, wearing little but her t-shirt and underwear from the day before, and she felt decidedly frosty upon awakening in more ways than one. She unceremoniously hefted a protesting William out of the way, dumped him on the floor, pulled some covers over herself, and then, lying sleepily in a soporific warmth, recalled her dream as best she could. As William tried to jump back on the bed, she threw him out and shut the door. "Time I had some space, Fluffums. Some bed partner you are, you beast. It's like sleeping with someone with St. Vitus dance. I really should put you out at night so that you can join your chums, yowling and fighting into the early hours." She remembered with a shudder that Stephen Savage had been an exceptionally restless bed partner. Even when he was actually still, he lay on his back with his mouth open and snored like an elephant. How was it even possible that such a little man could have such a loud and reverberating snore? She felt herself shrink and shrivel just a little as the unwelcome memory invaded her mind, unbidden, her already low spirits dragged down further by the recollection. She had been dreaming in the night, very intensely, and the memories were still fresh in her mind. They were lucid dreams, where there is a thin veil between reality and apparition. She was in her own home, exploring the hall and rooms of not only her flat, but of the whole building. Unobstructed by partition walls that were present only in some shadowy and etheric form, she was entirely at liberty to roam freely. Her most prevailing sensation was that of profound greyness and of demoralization. It was as if she was exploring the old prison during a power outage at dusk. There was little light, but all that was visible was apparent in the silhouette only, with occasional flashes of reflected light off the old shiny surfaces, such as the metal bars set in the thick wooden doors. Excuse me. Jessica had an overriding conviction that she had somehow been communicated with, not in a language as such, more sensation, an implication. There was a tortured presence, an abstraction so desperate and so dismal, and where greyness prevailed, uninviting and miserable. Yet there was also a strangely reassuring rightness to it, a confluence, as if she truly belonged in that realm. In the cold light of day, there was little sense to be made at first, as Jessica struggled to remember the final details of the dream. Frustratingly, as is often so typical, her memory of the adventure was draining away like sand in an egg timer, as the burgeoning consciousness of a rudely awakened mind rapidly refilled with 21st century clutter. A connection had occurred, which, though tenuous, fragile, and ethereal, gradually formed a picture in Jessica's mind. The link was with someone, no one she knew, and yet there was a curious, familiar masculine presence. She had even spoken with him briefly, but could not remember what was said, or even what he looked like. She felt that he was a kind, a gentle man, a gentleman, but one who was in extraordinary pain. Her biggest recollection was of the amazing empathy between them, a meeting of the mind and of the soul. The man was disenchanted and much in anguish. Jessica experienced the vaguest recollection of him devouring a feast, a meal that was to be his last, without knowing how or why she felt that. There was also the unsettling sense that she was imprisoned, as though her body were rigid, completely immobile, and where her perception of the world was divined through the feelings of many others. No, it was more than that. It was some kind of matrix, connection, and an intuitive knowing. Jessica really did feel very odd, not at all herself, and for a moment she speculated that she might be coming down with flu. Her ears were ringing, an affliction that was usually a sure sign that she was in the grip of some encroaching malady. She climbed out of bed, her long, still plaited hair awry and resembling a bristle brush. Then she put on a flannelette dressing gown, plugged in the kettle, and absent-mindedly heated up some porridge, her mind still on quite another plane. She also put a pan of water on the stove for some poached eggs, and experienced a completely alien and highly inexplicable urge to eat kidneys. This was a sensation so foreign to her that she speculated for just the briefest of intervals whether she might be pregnant, but then ruled that out with some measure of relief as a biological impossibility. This was enforced by a sense of the coming onset of cramps in her lower stomach. Her breasts were painfully sensitive. That time was looming. Maybe that's why she felt so off-colour, tired, listless, but simultaneously restless, and really not quite sure what to do with herself. Large mug of tea in hand, Jessica reached for the remote, aimed it at the television, and acknowledged the response in the form of that characteristic click and whoomph of highly charged static. This was something that she would normally never have considered doing in the morning, unless she was sick, but she badly needed a distraction. In any case, she really did feel unwell. The clatter of the cat flap heralded William's return, and recovering from his rejection, decided to give his mistress another chance. Hopping onto her lap, he dug his claws into her knees as he purred and kneaded her legs. "Hello, sweet cakes. God, you're so predictable. I know exactly what you want." She popped a piece of rich tea biscuit onto the floor, and as he jumped off, ever the slave to his desires, he concentrated on his treat, both purring and crunching happily. Jessica rearranged herself, putting her feet up sideways onto the couch, and covered herself with a blanket. It was a Sunday, and she took a little pleasure in the knowledge that the day was hers to do with as she pleased. She merely wanted to hunker down and hide from the world. There was nothing much on at the telly, but facile chat between early morning presenters. American Idol, which held no appeal for Jessica, but then on another channel was Steve Martin as Inspector Clouseau. Jessica virtually frothed at the mouth with indignation. How could they? Peter Sellers was a genius. This is a ghastly abomination. She clicked off the television in disgust, sat back and closed her eyes for a moment. William, having finished his treat, and realising that no more was forthcoming for the moment, had decided that he wanted to go outside again, and was flicking the cat flap annoyingly and insistently. Jessica got up, opened the door for him, even though he was quite capable of letting himself in and out. It was a little game he played with her, and thereby showing her who really was boss. The phone rang. Jessica shrank visibly, recoiling in horror, sensing invasion but fearing an urgent work call. She picked up the receiver and answered defensively. It was Julia, her lifelong friend, who sounded a little deflated at Jessica's response. "Jess, was it something I said?" Julia lived in Glastonbury with her husband and 4 unruly children, where they ran a small organic farm. They perpetually teetered on the brink of financial ruin, but always made it through somehow. What always amazed Jessica, who'd been born under the sign of Aries and who could only survive in the world with a well-ordered bank account and taxes paid, was that Julia and her husband cared little for their precarious financial position and had scant regard for banks or for the government. Jessica in the past had remonstrated with Julia, suggesting that affairs in order meant peace of mind. Julia snorted at this suggestion and remarked haughtily, "I have no intention of entering that soulless grey world somewhere in the phantom zone, where people are assessed purely in monetary terms. You know, Jessica, that these power-hungry, money-laundering cretins at the head of financial institutions are just vampires. They are incapable of feeling the slightest joy other than when they are sucking the lifeblood out of innocence." Then Julia had giggled. Jessica could just imagine the beguiling flash of mischief crossing her features for a fleeting moment. She changed the subject and became suddenly serious, instead devoting all of her frustration, anger and attention upon the plight of organic farmers and of the dismal state of affairs in the livestock-related food production industry. This was the last time Jessica and Julia had seen each other, but now Jessica badly needed to chat. "Hello, Jules. My gosh, it seems so long since I last spoke to you. I'm so sorry, my love. I always seem to be busy, and time just passes me by. How are you all?" "Oh, you know, same old, same old. Trying to figure out which way is up. You know how it is here in this crazy country of yours. Idiots in government introducing pointless bureaucratic crap. You know, don't you, that beef cattle have for so long been bombarded with medication, all types, which most people ingest constantly. The strain of antibiotic-resistant E. coli is spreading like wildfire. No surprises there. And the EEC bureaucrats are running around like headless chickens, and of course, all we get is the fallout from the political crap. Anyway, I didn't phone you to bore you about farming. I dreamed about you last night." Jessica was always slightly amused by Julia and her earnestness regarding matters to do with organic farming and the rights of the common man. Jessica in more recent years made intermittent attempts to eat organically, mostly because of Julia's influence and to be supportive of organic farmers. Unfortunately, she was also a fast food junkie and enjoyed things like burgers and chips, doner kebabs and hot dogs. Anything made from mass-produced lips and arse, as Julia had once remarked in her typically transatlantic fashion. Jessica was bound to admit, even though she knew little of such things, that Julia's cattle appeared radiant with vitality and good health. Despite owning a farm riddled with badger sets, where it was almost impossible not to fall over a badger at least once a day, they had never suffered an outbreak of bovine tuberculosis in 15 years, nor ever would, according to Julia and her husband, John. "Jules, I so miss you all. How are those delightful children, and John, and the cats, and the dog?" "Oh, you know, snotty, hairy and muddy, especially John, but we're all happy despite it all. We muddle along. Hey Jess, as I was saying, I dreamed about you, and then had to walk over to Honeymoon Lake this morning to consult the water. You never guess what." Jessica loved Julia's eccentric predilection for old-world mysticism and her interest in something she referred to as scrying, though Jessica did not understand it at all. Jessica really avoided the subject whenever possible, and instead opted to pour fun-loving scorn on Julia's pronouncements and predictions. "Let me guess. Jesus' second coming. Or are we all about to be visited by a reincarnation of Genghis Khan on the 23rd of December 2012? Bloody good idea if you ask me, Jules. Maybe he'll get rid of our despised politicians." "Jess, be serious for a moment. This is important. I need to talk to you. Don't suppose you fancy coming to stay for a day or two? I'd so love to see you." There was actually a note of urgency in Julie's voice, which both surprised and slightly disturbed Jessica. "I'd love to see you too, Jules. But, you know, farms and me are like oil and water. In any case, I can't at the moment. I've got a suspicious incident to look into." "Oh? What sort of incident?" "Julia, I wish I could tell you, but I can't. All the usual classified crap, but I'd love to see you. I miss you all so much." "Listen to me, Jess. This is important. In my dream, I saw you talking with a man. I can't remember any details, but it was as if he were communicating with a powerful consciousness. It disturbed me so much that I had to run to the lake in my nightdress and gumboots. Jessica called to mind the amusing spectacle of Julia leaping and skittering among the windy hills in her night attire and Wellington boots. As was so typical of her, Julia had somehow tuned in again, and Jessica could not help but be amazed by the uncanny parallels between her own dream and Julia's, but they had been inseparable friends at school and had always been very linked. They had shared ideas, beliefs, interest in music, clothes, books, and even occasionally boyfriends. In many ways, Julia was the complete antithesis of Jessica, Pisces, little and dynamic, ash blonde with pale green eyes, a wide transatlantic mouth, and an expansive array of perfect white teeth. She was exceptionally pretty. Unlike Jessica, Julia was a dreamer, a poet, and a wonderful fiddle player. Despite her private school education in Britain, Julia had retained a pronounced West Coast Canadian accent in contrast to Jessica's terribly clipped English way of speaking. Julia had come over as a boarder at school and had never really gone back to live in her native country, though she spoke of it often and with evident fondness. She was good for Jessica, partly because she was less inhibited than a typical Briton, and wasn't afraid to say things that a British person would only think. As Julia often said herself, one of the advantages of being a North American was that she was not in the least restrained by British customs and protocols. Their relationship worked, and they were indivisible in spirit. Jessica was taken aback at attempted levity, the typical egocentricity of an Aries. I hope he was good looking and wealthy. Just my cup of tea, actually, come to think of it. Someone rich but undemanding, who doesn't snore, who can't help but be tidy. Hey, look, Jess, I know you think I'm just some nut-bar hippie with eccentric interests in witchcraft, but I know what I feel, and more to the point, I know what you feel. You can't fool me, you know that. Jessica had to admit there had been a couple of times when she had reluctantly involved Julia in some very tricky forensics case, and despite herself knew that Julia could achieve things that were quite beyond her explanation. Typically, Jessica's pragmatic mind would become obsessed with riddle solving, utilising accepted scientific methodology. She tackled cases as one would create a flowchart, a flawless but unimaginative approach that precluded genuine inspiration. She concentrated exclusively on the facts. Then the thought occurred to her that really it had been quite some time since she had seen Julia and the family. In truth, she ached to see them all, even if she would have to negotiate glutinous, muddy fields and help milk the cows. Look, Julia, I really am absolutely desperate to see you all. What are you doing the weekend after next? I'd love to come now, but really am tied up for next week, at least on a case. At least next week on a case. Oh, honey, you will have the greatest time, I promise. I'll get rid of John's motorcycle bits from the spare bedroom, fix the window, make up the bed. Oh, Jess, I can't wait. I've still got gallons of homemade scrumpy. I might even find a bottle of my folks' prairie moonshine somewhere. Sounds delightful, replied Jessica, resolving in that moment to fill the boot of the car with wine and beer, pack a hot water bottle, an electric blanket, and some draft excluder for the doors and windows. Julia did not respond, but changed the subject again, and Jessica knew that this was because she was receiving information, or in Jessica's opinion, suffering another wild outbreak of unrestrained imagination. Julia spoke almost as though she were in a trance. By the way, it's just come to me if this helps. The dead victim will have a puncture wound. A hypodermic one, I think, just inside her right nostril. Jessica was mildly astonished and forgot in that moment that the information was classified, quite apart from the fact that she had mentioned no details whatsoever. Are you saying that she was killed with a lethal injection? Of course she was, Jess. See you soon, can't wait. How is it that she can see all that, even though I said nothing, but still failed to grasp the simple truth that I loathe cider, always have and always will? Jessica suddenly felt happier after speaking to Julia, more upbeat. It was Sunday after all. Tomorrow she'll be busy back at work. Determined to enjoy the day, Jessica showered, dried her hair, but for once left it loose. Vibrant blue-black in colour, long and lustrous, the kind of hair that a woman could have been accused of harlotry and stoned to death for. On a rare whim, as the day was shaping up to be beautifully warm, she quite uncharacteristically put on a very feminine white knee-length, swirly summer skirt with a floral print design. She suddenly felt very daring, and then smiling to herself, put on a t-shirt with a plunging neckline and a legend on the front that read, "Save a horse, ride a cowboy." This gift was, of course, more of a deliberate act of provocation from Stephen Savage. He'd handed over the package to her with a slightly lascivious and irritating smirk upon his return from the western United States. "Time to show off those gorgeous hooters of yours to the world, my love, rather than hiding them as if you were leprous." Jessica, incensed, blazed a salvo of the purest white-hot anger. "Fuck you, Stephen Savage," and the horse he rode in on. He had laughed heartily at her response, a phrase which she had obviously used without really understanding its meaning. This expression was a hand-me-down from Julia, who had utilised the expression years earlier. A physics teacher was pouring scorn on Julia's lamentable, ineffectual grasp of the subject in a practical class experiment, while taking any opportunity to lean over her and peer down her cleavage. Jessica at the time could not help but memorise the deliciously transatlantic phrase. Like a piece of music or a song, an earworm, the expression played over and over in her mind, ad nauseum. She anticipated a time when she could use the phrase to greatest effect, like an incantation or witch's curse, and then suddenly, years later, the opportunity arose, and the invocation was cast. Stephen, while laughing uncontrollably, expressed his opinion that the comment could never be uttered by a posh bird who spoke with such an archetypal British accent. Then, seeing his blunder and her evident anger, attempted to make a conciliatory remark. "It really will suit you, Jess, honestly." Jessica was surprised to notice, however, that he was actually quite shocked. In truth, it was probably the first time he'd ever heard her swear. This event basically punctuated the end of their relationship as occasional, not very satisfactory lovers, preferring instead to be friends and occasional confidants. Jessica never really considered herself very sexual, didn't particularly like sex, and just endured the process as seldom as possible. She held so little self-esteem, and having no regard for innate beauty, she smothered her femininity. Like many ambitious young women, she considered her sex to be at a disadvantage, a terrible weakness that could only hamper her career in a predominantly man's world. Stephen's ill-considered remark just fueled the fires of her lamentable lack of self-worth. Why she decided to wear this provocative outfit was a mystery. To top it all, she rejected her glasses in preference for her rarely used contact lenses. The previous night's dream had not only disturbed her, but had left her with an inexplicable sense, for the first time in her life, of flirtatiousness. Chapter 7 next time.